Hi, and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, and I'm really excited about today's author conversation because this book is just so good. Not only does Not Your Average Joe have a fabulously beautiful cover, I just love it, but it's a really solid story that really tackles a lot of issues that teens, especially minority teens, are dealing with, and microaggressions and chasing their dreams even though parents might not agree with their decisions and what they want to pursue. So this conversation covers a lot of ground. So here's my conversation with Grace K. Shim. Welcome to Literary Hype. I am thrilled to have you on to talk about your brand new book, Not Your Average Joe. This book is so much fun. So for anybody who hasn't seen this online yet, or on their social media, give us a little introduction to what this story is about.
This story is about a Korean American girl who sort of feels misunderstood in her hometown in Arkansas. And, she convinces her parents to send her to a boarding school for the arts in Los Angeles. And, when she gets there, there's a few bumps in the road, but she starts to find her groove, and she's starting to feel like an average American teenager, which is kind of sort of what she's been searching for up until that point. And her band is starting to take off and catches the eye of a famed music producer who is interested in signing them on for a record deal, but has some concerns and pretty explicitly is telling them that she can't, that the main character can't sing the lead to her own song because they don't know how to market a band with an Asian American female lead. And so the story sort of takes off there, following Riley and how she navigates these waters where she has to really ask herself how much she's willing to compromise for her dream.
There is a lot of musical industry jargon kind of research that you had to do in this. Did you have a musical background, or how did you really dive into all this musical terminology?
Oh my God. It was like my first novel was about fashion. Like, these are the things that you have to like kind of incorporate as an author, like, the creative side of you to like use as a vehicle to kind of like tell your story. And like in my first book, The Noh Family, I used fashion as that vehicle. And you think I would have learned my lesson because I don't have a fashion background. So that part was really challenging, but I didn't know. So I chose music, which was also not part of my background. So you're right. The most challenging part of this book was learning more about the industry. Like, in general, I think I have a vague understanding as, the average American person about the music industry, that, they largely operate based on sort of unchecked bias, principles. And it just kind of, it's part of the industry. It's been so normalized in the industry that it's not even something that is raised as a concern, and people have accepted it because it comes with a territory of like wanting to be accepted in an industry that is notoriously based on appearance and that sort of thing. So I really wanted to talk about that because I think young people, especially, like, that's where we get our information from: pop culture, the media, entertainment, movies, TV, all of those things. And while movies and TV are sort of on, getting more heat for representation and, things like that, the music industry is a little bit more hidden. You don't really see these issues present themselves. So when I did have to do a lot of research because I started with a seed of an idea, but didn't really have a full understanding of it. So I was fortunate to be connected with some industry people who did share with me that, confirmed with me that these practices still, unfortunately, is, largely white, largely male, largely above, the age of 50. So it's not really representation of their target audience, but they are largely in control of what is being released into the media, or like what is being fed into these younger generations' minds.
And there's a line from one of the characters who's like the boy band ex-boy bander who is really big, and now he's like mentoring these high school students. And he talks about like you have to know your placement in order to move forward even before you get to the music part. So talk a little bit about helping this Korean American girl, kind of guiding her through that process in a fictional way.
I think it was only tough, like it wasn't tough to get behind the emotions of her, because obviously like I felt that at one point or another. I mean, I'm not pursuing music, but it's happened. You know, in all aspects. I mean, there was this one time that when I was younger, I think this was one of the first times that I had this real cultural awareness of like, oh, your face matters. Like, you know, like even though I was born and raised here, like my peers, like I think there are some things, some external factors that I couldn't escape, you know. And I think one of my earliest memories of that, or the first, was when I was auditioning for The Sound of Music, and I wanted to be one of the Von Trapp kids. When I didn't get the part, it sort of lingered. Like, was it because I didn't look like the part, or because I really truly didn't have the acting or the singing talent to like advance, you know? So I think those sorts of questions always linger. So in writing Riley, as she navigates this precarious position that she's in, it wasn't really hard to know what she was feeling. I think what was really hard was to give her agency on like how to navigate that, because I do think it's very tricky. And there's another character in there who sort of is the other side of the spectrum, which is like, you got to do what it takes to make it, you know, like just kind of keep your head down and work hard. And that is the mentality of a lot of people. And I think for Riley, though, she's in a very unique position where she wants not just to have a position, but wants to sing the songs that she writes. And there's that appropriation piece where, you know, your work is good enough for us, but you yourself are not good enough for us. So I think that was particularly challenging for me to write her with so much agency towards the end, especially because I've never felt very, I mean, I learned all of these things later in my life. I wasn't quite as young as her when I figured this out, and, you know, and so I think that part was challenging, but I thought it was important because for young people, they need to understand, you know, there are some things worth speaking up, and yeah, some things worth just kind of just going along just to get along.
So talk a little bit about how much of yourself you put into this, because you also came from Midwest and now you're living in California, which is similar journey that Riley Joe goes on. Let's talk about putting yourself into this book.
I will go on record to say that, like, I don't think anything I write will not be in part biographical, because you know, like, write what you know is sort of like what, you know, how the saying goes in writing. And I feel like to be an authentic writer for myself personally, I know that this is not every author's mantra, but for myself, like, I don't know if I can write authentic, genuine characters without being able to feel in some part like them. And, you know, like there's a wide net in this book. You know, there are people coming from all spectrums. And I have to say, even the ones that don't, you know, even the advisor, like I can actually put myself in their shoes and see how they feel, why they feel that way. So I think, like, even in those characters too, I feel like I have to understand where they're coming from in order to write them, or else it will come out stilted, or, you know, like the readers will feel it. So I think part of my challenge is to not write it too much on the nose as my experience, but it does sound very eerily similar that, yeah, I went to a boarding school, I had a cultural awakening, I, you know, had to navigate some choppy waters, and, you know, all that stuff. So it is in part, I did send a copy of the book to my boarding school, and I said, listen, this sounds a lot like my experience here at this school, but let me tell you, the story itself is very different, you know, like the journey that the character goes to. And a lot of my stories start out with something that I know, and something that I've experienced, but then really takes off when I put a spin on it and think, what if this happened, and what if that happened? So that's where the creativity and imagination come into play. And like write a true work of fiction.
One of the characters that I really loved was Ms. Morales and how she's supporting Riley Joe through this journey. Talk a little bit about how important it is for teenagers to see good teachers on the page and to know that they can get that support from teachers in their own schools.
Yeah, I love her too, because I think everyone needs a Miss Morales in their life. You know, like especially nowadays, I totally get this part too, because I used to, I used to teach first grade, and it was every day it was challenging. And there's some that you inspire more than others, but I feel it more particularly now that teachers are so stretched post pandemic, and it can feel very just trying to get through it. But like my experience, you're going to get teachers that you gel with more, or that inspire you more, or that get you more, to be honest, in subjects that you're better at than others. And I think it's really important to sort of show, on one end of the spectrum, I showed some ways that schools and teachers can really manipulate the situation to be unfair, but I really wanted to show a balanced full picture, that there can also be teachers that are like really championing their students and in their corner, and inspire them to do great things, because that's human nature. There's always going to be people on all ends of the spectrum. So I didn't want to paint this picture of schools are bad, or the music industry is terrible, or like it's all racist and bad. So it's all about striking a balance, because I think that's just more realistic picture of our landscape.
Since you just touched on the racism aspect of this book, it's not subtle. It's not.
Yeah, in her
and the
case, yeah.
microaggressions. So why was it so important for you to start the story with her struggling with the microaggressions before you really dive into the music side of the story?
That kind of evolved in a way where I had to unpack it myself. Originally, I wanted it to be a story about microaggressions, because I think that is what plagues our society from day to day. Like, there's very extreme cases of race hate crimes, all across the world, to be honest, but in the US. But particularly post-pandemic. But I wanted to kind of address sort of what teenagers will be experiencing on a day-to-day basis, in a really practical and accessible way for kids to, because these are things that they're going to really encounter. Like, some may never encounter a violent race crime, but they will encounter these subtle biases on a day-to-day basis, like whether it's happening to them or to a peer or someone in their cohort. So I wanted that to be part of the message. But I also, in writing that, started to dig deeper, wondering why these things are still acceptable by society, or, go unchecked, or it's just embedded in our subconscious, whether we realize we're projecting our subconscious bias on our, community. And I think that really, that's where the music piece was really important, and how I talked earlier about, how that's where the young people sort of get their information, their perceived information about what the world is like. And it's not always accurate. And it's through this lens dictated by, old white men in their 50s, so I just, I thought it was really important to show that, yes, this is a part of our culture, but it is, the music industry, the entertainment industry is not an accurate representation of our cultural, the American culture and what it is today. So writing this book was really important to me personally, because I thought, the more we could expose just the nuances of racism. And yeah, it does get pretty explicit towards, the middle of it. And it is really blatant, but, I wanted to show why those things, it just trickles down into our subconscious, and people are doing it whether they know it or not. And those people in, those positions of power are really the ones who are dictating what the young people are shaping their minds, basically.
Throughout this book, you do reference some real Asian hate crimes that, like, I remember covering in my news career. What was it like for you to incorporate those to show the reality of how serious the Asian hate crime trend is?
I actually started writing this book in 2018. And so this was kind of before the Asian hate crimes were really gaining traction, if you will. I mean, it's kind of sad that that is something that has to happen for awareness to be there. But, I think the idea of the story was sort of had less weight or less appeal to publishing. And it's so sad to have to say that, but, I think for a long time we were considered the model minority. I think as a whole, the Asian community was really perceived as a marginalized group that relatively wasn't hurting, or being affected in any way. So I think for me, after the Asian hate crime, when the book finally did get picked up, it was after the pandemic. So it underwent a lot of revisions. I really wanted to incorporate some of those more recent revelations, which is why I started out kind of coming out of the pandemic for these characters and the setting, because I think the concept was always there. It never really changed, but it did sort of add more I hate to say this, but relevance. My whole reason for wanting to write a book like this was because the subtle racism and the microaggressions really bubble up and will erupt in ways that are are physical or, are more violent. And I hate to say it, but when the violent crime started, I really did think, I told you this was going to happen. I knew this was going to happen. We as a race are just not taken seriously when we complain about microaggressions, which then makes us easy targets for scapegoating when things do get bad. When COVID, was sort of a hot topic with, the Asian hate crimes and the China origin, so I felt like vindicated in a way, I told you so, but also now is not a time for that. I think I just want to use what is really relevant and helpful to sort of sending that message and saying, listen, this is what happens when you don't take these issues seriously. When they're small, they're going to eventually become big, and then it'll be kind of more crisis mode. So it was really important for me to talk about some of those realistic, now it's realistic, crimes that are happening in our neighborhoods today.
There's a line in here, and I'm probably going to get it not quite right, but it's is there not diversity within diversity, or can there not be diversity within diversity? So kind of share a little bit about helping teens understand that just because you're a Korean American doesn't mean that there's one way to be a Korean American.
That was really shocking to me, I think, when I went to boarding school, because the Asian population there was 20%, and we had a small school. So it was a pretty big percentage of the student population. And I kind of was like, yay, my people, I finally have arrived, and I honestly, I had received a lot of just flack from both ends, I dated a white guy. So of course the Asian community was like, oh, and then, the white community was, just slurs, throwing them around without realizing how harmful they were, so it was just sort of a confusing time for me, for sure. But and I will say, I was on a panel a year ago with a fellow Korean American who was moderating, and he's a professor at one of the universities. And I mean, he just came from Korea, within the past year. So his English wasn't really good, and he was just learning about the culture. And I think he himself felt more Korean than American, but he still identified him as a Korean American. And, on the panel, I had to actually stop and say, we're both considered Korean American, but you can just, within a minute of meeting us, that we're different. That we're not, being Korean American is not, a monolith either. So I really felt that also in my marriage, I'm married to another Korean American man, and he comes from a very different, their family speaks Korean still and doesn't speak English. And so I think there is this expectation, when when Riley meets Ari's family, that was very much inspired by me meeting my in-laws. Like, they're kind of like, wait, you don't speak Korean? So, there is a lot of that still, like that, this perception that because you're Korean American or you have immigrant parents, that speaking Korean was part of your childhood. And, I have to say, we lived in Oklahoma. My parents worked for American company. My mom worked for American Airlines. My dad worked for Amoco, like speaking English and assimilating was pretty much our childhood, so I felt American as soon as I was born, pretty much, and whereas my husband, still, speaks Korean to his parents still, and they are a very close-knit community with very only Korean speaking people. And, we've both been in the US for more than 3 decades. So it's kind of, what I mean? It's just, it's been on my mind. And I think, like, Koreans need to know that, Korean Americans need to know that. And just people in general need to know that there's a lot of diversity within diversity.
And you used a really great metaphor for explaining Asian Americans and diversity, and that is pickles.
The pickle.
I loved it so
Okay.
much. How did you come up with that?
I don't even know. I think it was like in the last round of revisions, but I was like, you know what it was? It was, I didn't want to be too explainy, like, especially in a topic so heavy and speaking to young kids, like, really wanted them to understand it, like, without having to, like, be so on the nose about it. And it just came really well together when I started thinking about it. And then I was like, oh, and it's salty, kind of like the character herself. Like, so I felt like, all in all, like, I just happened on it. Like, it was meant to be, it was like one of those lightning bolt moments where I was like, I have to use this because there's no better way to explain how this, give you a snapshot picture of this character. So I'm glad you liked it.
And going along with the pickle metaphor, these characters love to eat spaghetti with pickles. Where did that come from?
Credit my childhood. It very much did. My father is such an inspiration to me because, like, the dad in there kind of is somewhat based on him because he, like, has such a thick accent, but, like, felt so American, so he would use so many American, like, isms, but, like, with a very thick accent, and it just felt very wrong, but, like, I just admired his just embracing of the Americana, just culture, like, right away, and loving everything about it. But one of the things we didn't have, like, kimchi growing up near us. And it is such a staple in our, diet. And it's literally like, I'll be at my in-laws' house and we're eating something and they're like, oh, but there's no kimchi, and it's really just like a concern, like, but how can you eat that? There's no kimchi. And I'm like, it'll be fine. Like, we had to really just modify and accommodate. And my dad just was like, I need something tangy. So we would always just have pickles. And later I'd meet other Korean Americans that would have the same experience. So I realized, I was like, oh, that's not that weird, sort of.
But is it good together?
I don't know because I won't try it. Like, I know I'm such a hypocrite because I think the whole idea was to be open. But, I think I think I did try it and I was like, not for me, but you do you, Dad, you're all good.
So the hashtag very Asian quote in here, is that in reference to the Very Asian Foundation and all of that?
This book was written so long ago. I think it was way more prevalent in, like, cultural, it was just, like, way more prevalent in pop culture.
So that hashtag very Asian thing was one of my coworker at the time, Michelle.
Oh,
so I saw that, yes. And I immediately texted her and was like, oh my God.
She's your coworker? Okay, so you have to relate to her. Like, I almost even had a thought, like, because that was happening around the time I was, like, revising this. I think I was writing this book, and I wanted to send, like, I was like, how do I send her a copy without, being too creepy? And I just never got to it because I have weird issues like that. But she's an inspiration. I mean, I, like, listen to her like that whole thing unfolded. It was just so shitty. Like, and if you ever get a chance to tell her, I really just admired her putting it all out there, because like in the book, I'm very much like the character where I'm just like, I don't know if I need to if I want to talk about it or just do the best I can with what I've got, so yes, it was a nod to her, actually. I was so just, inspired by her.
Awesome. I saw that immediately. It was screaming and text her with
Oh,
hashtag very Asian sighting in a book. And she's like, OMG, where?
oh my gosh, I'm so glad she's excited. It really took off too.
Yeah,
I saw Hollywood celebrities wearing shirts and stuff and merch. It's great.
being on Ellen.
Yeah.
She was actually the first interview I did on Literary Hype about the May book list.
Really?
Yeah, she was launched on
Oh,
my channel.
and she wrote a book too,
Yeah,
right?
she's since
Yeah, yeah.
written books. So I just love her so much and was so
Yeah,
excited when I saw that.
I'm fangirling now. Okay.
So one thing in this book that made me a very happy TV nerd is how let's see if I can get it to show up.
Oh yeah.
Video scripting, because that is pretty close to accurate on how in TV we would script something. So did you get any assistance on learning how to do that, or what made you decide to include the video scripts?
Oh yeah. So that was a fun addition, which I mean, at the time I didn't think it was fun because that meant rewriting the book to incorporate a documentarian, documenting their journey. So it was started out as a 4-person band, but then my brilliant editor had the idea of making one of the band members be a video person who had to do it as a project. So then you kind of got a different perspective, because we did need sort of a narrator or their omniscient narrator kind of following them. And I was like, oh yes, that sounds wonderful. Now I have to write it. So that was pretty painful process, but I have 100% no regrets, because I think it made it stronger and better. I am very fortunate to be in a writing, one of my early mom friends here and I took a local writing course together before we were published authors. And she's a great writer, who is actually a documentarian by trade. So right now she's been doing documentaries, and it really sort of slipped my mind that she had done that, because we just were friends and we talked about writing, and I was struggling. You can do a quick Google search and see what it looks like, but there's just so much content out there, and there's I just don't know, what to model it after. So I asked her to look at it, and she did a really great job of going through it, giving me tips and helping me format and the lingo, and just kind of giving me her, because she does all the filming as well. So she did give me a lot of the background information for writing a very elementary, a very, high school project version of a documentary script. There were some liberties that I took, facial cues and things that were sort of more helpful for a reader's perspective to visualize, which she did say, this is not usually done, but, I see what you're trying to do. So whatever, this is a work of fiction. So we kept those in there, but I'm glad you say that it seems pretty accurate, because I did have a professional's eye look at it, and her name is Linda Freund, and she's amazing. And so I credit her for all of that.
I was like, all it needed was the all caps and the time codes.
Oh my gosh. That would have been a whole other project in and of itself.
Yeah, which I totally understand, leaving out time codes, because I don't even like doing the time codes when I have to do it for my own job.
Yeah, that sounds pretty labor intensive.
It is. It's annoying, but we do it for the art.
Yeah, exactly.
You posted on Instagram about your husband and how supportive he's been. And it was the cutest little thing. He got your main character made from Etsy.
Oh my gosh, I was so surprised. And first of all, how many of y'all's partners know what Etsy is and have ordered something from Etsy? Yeah. So that in and of itself, I was like, what a leap. And for a long time, he's not a raw person. So just so people understand, he shows his support in more subtle ways, so just giving me the space and the freedom to explore this, because what a lot of people don't understand is writing is, it's like that graphics of the iceberg, where you see like the iceberg and then you see like how big the chunk is at the bottom, right? So for years I had been writing, trying to get published, trying to get an agent, to even want to like try to get me published. And, that was years. And right now I probably have been writing longer than I have been agented, so just to give you some perspective of how long it takes. And I'm a self-taught writer because when I finally had the courage to say I want to pursue traditional publishing too. I was very specific in wanting to go that route. When I finally had the courage to say that, I was a mom. I just had my third child. I had given up my career to be an early childhood educator because I felt that I could best utilize my skills and knowledge at home with the kids. And besides, teaching would not even cover like the childcare cost of 3 kids. So it was just a practical decision I made at the time. However, when you're 3 kids deep, it feels like, you're trapped. Like there's nowhere to go from there. So I think not even being able to go to school and start all over, all of that, I was self-taught for most of that. And, his support really came, like looking back, I see he wasn't the type of support that was like, you got this, you're an amazing writer. It wasn't like the cheerleading type. It was like, here's a computer, you do you do what you have to do, but I was still, full-time caregiver. And so I was writing at night, I was writing on the weekends, I was writing during nap times, I was writing in carpool lines, so I was trying to figure it out for so long. And, throughout it all, it had been a part of my life. So I think seeing that really just made me feel like, hey, I don't really appreciate you enough. And, he's not even on Instagram. So I had to kind of be like, hey, like I really, really appreciate you. And, taking the kids, he's got a full-time job, he's full-time, he's the breadwinner. And another thing that people need to understand about writing or being an author is that unless you're like a John Grisham or John Green, or, it is in no way can support a family of 5, like a full-time career in that way. So I literally, he's has a full-time busy career too. And the fact that he's supporting me in this venture it means the world to me.
We love a supportive partner. Well, the last question we always ask is, because this is Literary Hype, what books are you hyped about?
Let's talk about Ana Gracia's next book. Well, the idea of the 3 different perspectives of girls going through this like really challenging, from different backgrounds and perspectives, in a very high competitive nature of tennis, in the world of tennis. My nieces play tennis, and I hear a lot of it from my sister. It's very, very competitive. So I think it kind of sounds like a YA Carrie Soto book. And I read that book, and that was really interesting to see the tennis world from that perspective. So I'm super excited for Ana Gracia's book. Books that I have loved recently, and I can't stop talking about, is Angie Kim's Happiness Falls. It took a surprising turn because I learned so much about a very specific genetic disorder that I just didn't think I would get from a mystery novel, so it was like, the added bonus of, hey, I learned something about a super niche community, and it felt very like I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I read a super interesting book for fun, and I also learned something, very, very informative for future reference. So I can't stop recommending that book. Another book that I'm super excited to read is What We Kept to Ourselves. She writes family drama really well. And there's another YA rom-com that's really cute called Rules for Breaking Rules by Talia Tucker. And it's about Korean American. Do you have that? A Korean American.
I feel like I have it. I feel like it's a pink one, but I cannot remember.
Yes, it's a pink. It's a very, very cute
It's
cover.
over here somewhere then.
Yeah. It's called Rules for Rule Breaking by Talia Tucker. So yeah, so anyways, those are some recommendations that I'm excited for.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk about your new book, Not Your Average Joe, and all the other things that we covered a lot of ground.
I've really enjoyed being a part of this, interview, and like talking to you about books and other things.
Thanks again to Grace for taking time out of her day to talk Not Your Average Joe, especially right after making a live TV appearance. So, very appreciated. If you would like to get your hands on this book, which you definitely should, this is a fast read. The link to do so is down below in the description, as well as a link for her first book, The Noh Family. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.